And we're live.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever the heck in the world you are. There's a lot of things going on, and we are on basically on the forefront of this information. There's a lot of juicy details coming out, and when there's juicy details coming about, when in regards to military operations, drills, and such the like, we have none other than the man himself, the international man of mystery, our very own James Bond himself. Yes, I bring forth to you W. He's right
Well,
now
that's
surfacing in his Cold War submarine somewhere off the coast of Washington and Oregon. There's a Cold War era submarine that surfaced, and W's here. W, what's up, buddy?
well. Let me get the hatch closed here so nobody hears us. Hey, you know the. Let's start out at an interesting spot. I want to just dive right into it. Of course, some of your listeners may not be aware there was this military drills going on in Los Angeles that started the day before President Trump's State of the Union speech. In order to get there, there's a couple other places we want to go, but just as a primer, um, although it was announced that last minute type of thing that there was going to be military drills, live operations in the Los Angeles area, the news media was invited to observe those activities in the area of Long Beach, California. Simultaneous but separate and not a drill was the landing of military helicopters, including two Blackhawks, on Wilshire Boulevard at 9 o'clock at night in traffic without any preparations to the area or community to clear, evacuate, make space. They just started a military operation. It was very instantaneous and quite bizarre. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But let me back up for a minute and let's just put these last couple of months in context. Going back for those people that are following the Q stuff and similar, the president's tweets, etc. There's been so much scuttlebutt. There's been so much concern about arrests and when are they going to start and why aren't they already going. I've of course discussed some of this in reference to the Q team project and the dark to light. In the last interview that I did with you there, V, we talked about the Christmas, the day after Christmas battle with Washington at Trenton that changed the course of the Revolutionary War with Britain. In the days after that, of course, we had the shutdown of the government in this budget battle over the wall with Congress and authorization for that wall. Interesting thing happened, and I think that this is as good a place to start. In this battle, there was all sorts of leaks, conversations, trolling, whatever way you want to put it, that indicated that the president had intended to go to Iraq and be there on Christmas Day to meet the troops. But he didn't. And then there was people wondering why he wouldn't go there. And then there was other reports that there was, in fact, some type of an operation that had been discovered where there was going to be attacks on various world leaders to kill not just one, but multiple world leaders within that Christmas Eve, Christmas Day period. And that President Trump had delayed his trip and spent that time conversing with these leaders and sharing intelligence related to what was going to happen or was going to be attempted, and having our intelligence agencies and policing agencies assist those other countries' leaders in protecting themselves and thwarting any potential attack. A couple days after that, a American spy who just so happened to have 4 different passports that were all legit from various countries, Commonwealth countries and the U.S., was picked up in Moscow, spying on the Russians. That's highly questionable on several fronts, and it's been asserted that in fact he was there to convey information to the Russian intelligence services of a very direct nature concerning the threat that had just occurred, and to verify that they had that it was real, and that allow them to fully take out those people that were responsible for potentially a life-threatening event. And we'll just leave that at that for now. The next thing that happened in this series, people complained because we weren't getting much communication.
Hey, W.
Yes.
W, real quick, you wanted me to remind you as far as the vax thing that you wanted to.
Yes, I'm getting that right now.
Okay, cool. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yep. No. So on January 6th, the National Academy of Theatrical Arts and Sciences, which is Satan backwards, had their Golden Globes Award ceremony. That was January 6th. And we know that there's this karmic law of reciprocity that says that both God and Satan tell the people what they're going to do if, ahead of time. It removes the consequences, if you will, from a satanic perspective, from an occult perspective. If you tell a person what you're going to do and they have the opportunity to bypass it, get out of the way, stop it, etc. But if they do nothing, then they're in agreement with it and they've accepted it, and they're participants. And so in order to protect themselves from any reciprocity from God, they tell you what they're going to do in advance. And so they do it in theater, they do it in movies, they do it lots of different ways. And it's the contention of many that, for example, these awards ceremonies and things like that are one of the most direct ways where they tell you what they're intending to do in advance. So in this bizarre presentation during the Golden Globe Awards, as some comedic humor, they mentioned that they were going to order pizza for everybody, which in this current environment,
That's just sick.
anybody that knows that's been around for the last 2 years, paying attention to all 3 years, that the whole pizza thing relates to the pedophilia and Comet Pizza and things like that. And you almost have to be living under a rock not to realize that there's this pedophile angle of the whole pizza conversation. So they raised the pizza. We were going to order pizza for you, but you already had something to eat. So we decided instead that we're going to give everybody a vaccination, a flu shot. And it was just so out of the blue, so shocking, so bizarre that, and it turned a lot of people off watching this. Why would they be giving shots? What's funny about that in this thing? And people accepted that people dressed up as, nurses or medical attendants went out in the audience and actually started, appearing to give people real shots. And in the course of giving those shots while they're out in the audience, the presenter also said, and anybody who's a vaxxer and doesn't want a shot, they can just put their napkin over their head and we'll bypass you. Now, in the whole world, putting a napkin over one's head is symbolic of only one activity at the dinner table. And that is the French delicacy, the consumption of the French delicacy, the ortolan bird. The ortolan bird is a very small bird. It's less than an ounce. They capture it out in the fields, and then they bring it in, they fatten it up, and then prior to consumption, they put the bird in boiling brandy, and with the bird's dying breath, it ingests some of the brandy and is marinated. And then they consume the bird whole. And because it's such a beautiful and innocent creature, and because of the decadency of the way that they go about the preparation and consumption of the bird, The custom is to place a napkin or a towel over your head so that God can't see you, to hold you accountable for this horrible, evil action while you consume the bird. And it's just a grotesque, horrible thing. One of the very last shows that Anthony Bourdain did was a show talking about this very type of meal and how it was prepared and what it was like, and they crunch it, everything, head, bones, everything, they eat the whole bird. He talks about the bones cutting into his gums and his tongue and things like that, because they're such small, fine bones, and the blood in his mouth running while he's eating this bird. It's just bizarre. I've given you a link that every listener here today should really take a listen to. The presenter in that link does an absolutely outstanding job, much better than I could ever do, and I don't want to take anything away from what he did in presenting his analysis of this event at the Golden Globes and the reference to the ortolan bird consumption. You really have to listen to that and everything that he's put in there, his excellent job. And I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, but it'll be linked here with this video. In order to put it in context, the rest of what I'm going to tell you, this, death of innocent parties, etc., and shielding yourself from God's view. So here at the Golden Globes, the Satan Awards, if you will, because that's what the National Academy of Theatrical Arts and Sciences is backwards. They love to, do their words backwards and in mirrors and hide their presence right there in plain sight. So at the Church of the Cult of Satan, there in Hollywood, they're celebrating this event with the vaxxing. So let's go forward just a little bit more. On January 17th, the soon-to-be Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Adam Schiff and other Congress people, as well as what was reported to be 93 family members of Nancy Pelosi, all of her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren, were preparing 11 days after the January 6th Golden Globe Awards and this bizarre event where they're telling you that they're going to do something potentially, this karmic event. Nancy's getting ready to leave the country on an Air Force plane. She had demanded to be able to pick the crew to pilot the planes that they were going to take to leave the country. And she was going to go to Egypt to tour the pyramids and things like that. She was going to visit military facilities in Afghanistan and Iraq, and take her family along and all this into conflict zones and things like that, plus Egypt, on the 17th, while we're in a budget crisis and everything else. Again, placing in context that it's been reported there have been several attempts. There was the Georgia bomber that was going to come to Washington and supposedly was going to purchase a missile, which wouldn't have done anything against the hardened facilities, most likely, but was going to try and kill President Trump and going to kill the vice president, and then she'd get to be president. There's all sorts of theories about what was really going to happen in the background, and who knows what was true, what isn't, but that was what was running around. But the president canceled that plane trip, and they had to stay here. Now, also in the background, we have the trial of El Chapo there in your neck of the woods there, V. And
That's right.
This has been going on for quite some time. El Chapo had connections to all the mob groups everywhere. He'd been in the drug dealing business for 30 years. He was in cahoots with the CIA and DEA people and politicians here in the U.S. and Mexico and other countries, including Guatemala. And obviously he had all sorts that he was trying to trade to get his freedom. Because he was extradited from Mexico, there isn't any death sentence allowed for people extradited from Mexico, so it would just been a life in prison or something. But you can guarantee that he was wheeling and dealing, trying to trade something for his freedom, because it was becoming more and more obvious that he wasn't going to win in court. Even back then, probably from a year ago when he was turned over. So, with that in mind, it's quite likely that he was even working with our intelligence agencies, trying to cut a deal and let them know how they could pick up some of the other people in exchange for, better conditions, or even some, hoped for release. He'd sell out anybody to get out of it, because this was a death sentence in prison for him. So we come up to February 3rd. February 3rd is the Super Bowl, and there was a unusual event happened. There was a light aircraft, a twin-engine plane, that had left in the Los Angeles area, was headed east. The owner of the plane living in Nevada, and an older guy, but his aircraft went above the cloud cover and was about 7,800 feet when it suddenly just began dropping, and came back through the cloud cover and was breaking up as it came through the cloud cover at, in an overspeed condition. It appears that the horizontal stabilizer in the tail area of the aircraft had already started to come off, which allows the plane to go into a faster condition. The engines revving, etc., and vibrations. The wings tore off of the aircraft, and it was just a fuselage hurling like a missile to the ground. The wings came down separate from the aircraft. He had no control of that aircraft as the plane was breaking up. There's no indication that I've heard that there was any communications from him of any kind of a problem in the aircraft prior to it beginning its descent, this crashing descent, which would tend to indicate that he may have had some type of a medical event, and it wasn't something, not serviced right, or that failed on the aircraft itself, that he may have passed out for any of, a million reasons. I'm sure there'll be something from the coroner's office that'll tell us that. So the aircraft had no control as it came to the ground. A wing went through a house where a family was watching the Super Bowl, husband, wife, and their adult children, and son and daughter-in-law, and all four of them were killed. So 5 people total died, but the pilot was alone in the plane. Interesting thing is, as the police were going through it, and what was reported on the news initially was that he had retirement papers and a badge in the cockpit of the aircraft in a glove box, and it identified him as a retired Chicago police officer, and also included retirement papers that were official enough that the police believed it, and that it was reported on local TV. The next day it came out that Chicago police had no record of him as ever having been a police officer. The badge was reported stolen many years ago, and all sorts of unusual things about him. He was apparently owned some restaurants, had closed a couple. It's an expensive aircraft, moderately expensive, similar to the types of aircraft that were being used and flown by the Las Vegas shooter from generally the same area as that. And there's more to be released on that, and I'll stop there for the moment. There's things about that are very interesting and unusual that need to be delved into further, but I want to hold that for a later time. But it does appear potentially connected to some of the next events. On Monday, the next day, February 4th, and one other thing that occurred during the Super Bowl was there was some news reports, local news reports there in Atlanta, talking about the child human trafficking, prostitution of young kids, and a policing operation to try to get some of these people that were hiring these child prostitutes and do sting operations there. And specifically in the broadcast, one in particular that I heard talked about the fact that specifically mentioned Guatemala. And the fact that many of these families and kids were targeted in Guatemala and trafficked from there here to the U.S. For these types of events, and specifically this event. So just, picking one country like that was kind of, a little unusual. I mean, you got trafficking coming from all over the place. So then on Monday the 4th, the day before the president gives his State of the Union address, there's kind of last minute announcements that there's going to be some military drills and operations going on in the greater Los Angeles area. Nobody be alarmed, nothing to see here. And news media was told that they could monitor this stuff in the Long Beach area. During this time, there's the largest drug seizure, one of the largest ever in history, 1.7 tons of various types of drugs seized in the Long Beach harbor. There was actually multiple locations in the harbor where these things were seized, and very serious types of drugs. So a very huge drug seizure. During that operation and the drill that's accompanying it, where these things are happening, at about 9 o'clock at night in the Wilshire Boulevard area, in one of the busiest sections of Wilshire Boulevard in the North Los Angeles area, an operation commenced where persons in protective suits rappelled out of helicopters onto buildings, and the specific building was the Guatemalan Cultural Center. And I'm just making a note to remember to say something else. So that Guatemalan Cultural Center is kind of interesting because in that building is also the offices of the attorney who is representing Keith Rainier and other persons in the NXIVM trials, criminal activity. And that's, of course, includes human trafficking and sex slavery and things like that. It's also money involved. And remember, where was Rainier when he was picked up, when he was arrested?
Guatemala.
Nope. He was in Mexico. What's going on at this time? What's going on at this time? El Chapo's trial. Rainier's trying to, keep a low profile, and he gets given up by somebody. And a lot of these other people are being picked up and thrown in jail. There's a lot of stuff going on there. There's all sorts of bizarre things related to the money. Of course, El Chapo's bank is HSBC there, his favorite money laundering operation. There's billions involved, enough that some people are saying that with the confiscated money, we can build the wall, just take the money from El Chapo and use that to build the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Also in this time period, while we reach immediately after we're through the 30 days of the government shutdown, when we can begin to furlough or fire government employees, not hire them back, if you will. Which is a very critical thing. The president had to get past that 30 days before he restarted the government. We had the beginning of the Venezuela coup, if you will, where the head of the Congress for the country there declares himself president, and they kick Maduro out. And there's all sorts of drama there, and it's this is going to be quite a while in the whole thing. Ultimately, this is about control of energy flow and pricing for the whole world, which is critical to us here in the United States and to everything that President Trump is doing, including dethroning the Saudis and things like that. Also, this is a place where Cuba's got heavy involvement in Venezuela. It's a launching point to South Africa and up into Europe with drug flow and for arms, and Hezbollah into the Americas. And remember, V, that I've spoken 3, 4, 5 years ago here with your audience about the fact that Hezbollah is staging in Venezuela for other activities throughout the Americas uh, in an attempt to cause disruption here, to distract from the things going on in the Mideast, and as a threat against us taking action in the Mideast or assisting Israel in taking action against Hezbollah and ultimately Iran.
You know,
So
the only thing about this whole entire thing that I really disagree with in terms of what's being put out in terms of intel is that whole Hezbollah thing. I don't see any real concrete evidence of Hezbollah being in any sort of operational strength in Venezuela or in Central or South America. I mean,
it
there
doesn't have
has
to
been
be
in
huge
Mexico. I could
operational.
say, I could tell you that.
Yeah, it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be huge operational numbers. What it is it's assists for some of the traffic. Remember, they're
I have Hamas in Central and South America, which is an entire CIA Mossad operation, not Hezbollah.
yes. Well, Hamas is the Israelis in their own paperwork. They
Correct. And
created
I could
Hamas.
see Hamas saying, "Oh yeah, we're Hezbollah. We're here doing this," and I could see a whole entire false flag narrative built on Hezbollah in Venezuela. And look at the guys who are putting this out. It's pompous Mike Pompeo, and the maniacal mustache Bolton, and the sycophant whitewasher who supports who covered up so much massacre, Elliot Abrams. So I got to take the
Well, and
neocon
let me
deep
just say
state with a
this.
grain of salt.
Well, let me just say this in support of what you're saying. Uh, this whole coup thing in Venezuela has been years in the making, long before President Trump took office. One of the things that President Trump has done is not necessarily to shut things down, uh, whether it be in the Mideast or other places with the CIA, with maybe the exception of stuff in North Korea and things like that, but rather to commandeer their operations and switch them over to things that suit our current purposes or bigger plans. So he really hasn't stopped a lot of these things, such as what's being done in Venezuela, just trying to take a ship that's already moving and redirect it somewhat. So there's certainly room for lots of argument, criticism on, for example, the legitimacy of Guaido and the people around him, or whether he's actually a good guy. I think he ends up being some type of an interim player, um, and we get to somebody else that ultimately is more favorable. But that's a conversation really for a different day. Except that I wanted in the background. There's all these dramas going across in South America, and it still relates to the money laundering, the drug trade, the human trafficking, of which El Chapo is still, a pretty good player, pretty involved player, knows a lot of what's going on, and he's in, this fight for his life. Even though he's in the trial, I'm sure he's working deals all over the place. So that's in the background somewhere. I don't want to get hung up on it in the rest of what I have to say here. So then here on this Monday, 9 o'clock at night, these helicopters, we have special operators who land on this building. They
Just so you know, I have the video playing that shows them coming out with the hazmat suit with the package they removed. So I have it playing.
That's
Go
right.
ahead. Okay, yep.
So they didn't really do much to clear out the area. They stopped some traffic in the area, but people are still in the buildings around the area. This was all done very spur of the moment. And so there were some people in an apartment that was overlooking this that happened to get a cell phone turned on and recorded the events they saw happening in the street down below. If we didn't have this recording from this angle, even though there was a couple of other people that got recordings, their angles weren't very good and they didn't show much of what actually occurred. So this one particular guy with everybody else in the room got some pretty good video, and it shows after the people had entered the building and blown up some devices, uh, um, concussion grenades, uh, these people coming out a few minutes later. And they load into two Black Hawk helicopters, two separate groups. The first group comes out with 2 packages into the first helicopter. The second group comes out with a larger package and goes into the second helicopter. And the rest of the troops are loaded into some of the smaller helicopters and flown out in this same time zone. The whole operation only takes a couple tens of minutes. And they're not waiting around to clean up. They're not waiting around for anything. They are gone. This is important because this wasn't a drill. This was not the kind of thing you do with a drill. So let's think about, you have all these helicopters, troops rappelling off onto a building, doing this operation. You're President Trump, and you have to personally authorize these aircraft, these helicopters, these military aircraft to do this type of an operation in a congested city. They can do the drill out in the desert. They can do it. They got facilities all over the place. They can simulate the buildings and things like that. There's lots of ways and places. There's, buildings that are closed down at night, landing areas that are set up for medical evacuations. We know where all the wires and posts and everything are. To do this in a downtown area, it may sound important for realism, etc. But just imagine that the president, first of all, he has to sign specifically the authorization for those military vehicles, even if it's contractors who are riding in those vehicles or operating them. They're still military vehicles. He has to sign an authorization for them to operate in this specific type of an environment in this way. Imagine you're President Trump. If you know 25 things that can go wrong, you're a genius. But there's 1,000 things that you never dreamed of that can go wrong in something like this. One pilot will make one tiny mistake, one miscalculation, and a helicopter has an event like was alleged to have happened in Pakistan when we were going allegedly after bin Laden, and this ghost ship crashed there in the compound. Imagine some event like that, and you have civilians in the buildings right next door and up and down the street in their cars. You could have lost, tens of people. You could have, caused chaos right in one of the busiest streets in the country, in the world. Does that make sense? I don't think that the president is that stupid that he would authorize that. If anything went wrong, that would cost him the presidency the next time around, potentially, just because he signed off on allowing a ill-advised training exercise in one of the most congested areas in the country, for a LARP, for whatever. So no, this was not a training exercise. This was the real deal. Now, the interesting thing about the location of this specific building, where this attorney that represented represents Nexium people, and this Guatemalan Cultural Center is located, is that it's right above a subway section that runs through this area of town, and just up the street is a hotel known as the Standard Hotel. Now, the reason that the Standard Hotel is interesting in this whole Pizzagate thing, all the allegations, is that within the Q community, it's asserted that one of the events where there was phones with cameras on that recorded it was an event where Adam Schiff was involved, and supposedly they were all high on adrenochrome. And it shows his arm, but doesn't show his face, but it's clear from the released photos that a wider shot would show exactly who the person is connected to that arm. It's asserted that it's Adam Schiff. There's a lot of innuendo there. One of the things that also happened was that when events at the Standard Hotel, which appear to be related to pedophilia and even cannibalism of children, when those things were just at the beginning of threatening to come out, the manager of that hotel and another person died in a helicopter crash there in Los Angeles area, that was, a bizarre, unexpected, obviously, event. And there's been speculation that that was a hit to take somebody out that could have spilled the goods on politicians and people related to those activities at the Standard Hotel. So we're in this nexus of a place where things are going on. What was in the containers, these Kevlar bags that were removed by these special operators on the helicopters? Well, those bags could have contained, and it's been asserted by a number of people, that biological, an Ebola, uh, any of the highly contagious, infectious diseases was there in the building, and the building was scheduled to be torn down this week. So here's a building that's going to be torn down in just a few days, or I should say that, this week. So there was some people that were asserting that this stuff was going to be in the building, and when they tore it down, it would get spread around the community and kill a bunch of people. It's not really a very good way to do it. The reality is that what you would do is probably spread a viral bacterial infection amongst passengers in the subway right there, to people in hotels right there in the neighborhood, including the Standard. You do it in an inside location where you don't have rain or winds that disperse it in ways that you can't control. And you wouldn't just have it in the building, because you wouldn't be able to guarantee that you would get good spreading. A building could fall on it and not really spread the contagion as effectively. So, but if you're using that as your hub, that can make perfect sense, because you go out and spread it around, and then the crime scene gets destroyed, 24, 48, 72 hours later. With any of these infectious diseases, it takes at least a day or two for it to begin to have patients show up. And then to find the nexus might take another day or something beyond that. So there's a process there. And in the meantime, you're able to wipe out the crime scene. The other contention is that potentially there was a small nuke, such as one of the Davy Crockett's, that are widely being discussed as missing from a decommissioned area in Texas several years ago. Those devices didn't have the nuclear material in them still, but that would be a pretty easy piece to fabricate if you had the blueprints. And something within the capability of, say, a North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, etc., with the right information. Just as easily, it could have been that there was some materials that could be used as a dirty bomb. And if you had a biological followed by some dirty bomb release, all the trucks leaving that side of the construction zone could be, letting stuff out through the highways and community, leaving the area. So some kind of a mass event. And then remember, I started this talking about the Golden Globes event, and they told you, potentially what was just ahead, and all the Hollywood people, all really, in large measure, the targets in this human trafficking, baby raping, child trafficking, even cannibalism, are really the targets. If they're going to do something in this thing to neutralize these investigations, some kind of a biological or nuclear event, dirty bomb, etc., right there in that area, might have been the perfect thing for cover. It has been asserted by other people in the alternative news media, and I don't know anything on the credibility. I just throw it out there as another data point. Was asserted that the large number of deaths and the what appears to be clearly some type of use of energy weapons to start and maintain these fires that occurred in California, there in Southern California,
Yep.
a couple of months back, that was because there was a biological release that was occurring, and they had to burn it out. I'm pretty skeptical on that, but it's at least worth having in the conversation, because in light of this event there on Wilshire Boulevard, that's very possible. And then the other thing is, here at the event on Wilshire, the only reason we even know that there was specific items removed is because of this one video. None of the other videos actually show that from other positions.
Correct.
Could very well have been other locations and events in other places, not just here in the U.S., but places in the world, including back to this Christmas period where the president apparently delayed his trip by a day to go see the troops. Who knows that we're not dealing with multiple locations, multiple events of a similar nature that were also thwarted. And again, I come back to Nancy Pelosi and these other Congress people leaving the country just days before this event in LA was potentially stopped from happening. The day before the State of the Union.
Right.
Was there some, if these materials in fact were present at that location, were there multiple times where they wanted to use it and had to delay for whatever reason because somebody couldn't get out of the way?
Hey, W, don't forget too, the Grammys were just a few days after this event.
Yep.
Well, that's right.
That could have been an obviously target and false flag event.
Well, and again, so we're looking through a glass darkly. I'm throwing stuff out for your listeners to consider. There's a lot of people that are fussing and hand-wringing that, for example, if there's going to be prosecutions related to Pizzagate and everything that's going on with the whole Q movement, looking for prosecution of politicians involved in, election fraud, fixing elections, taking payoffs, even involved in these human trafficking and baby raping and even cannibalism. Get on with it. If there's treason and fraud, let's make it happen. And so they're wringing their hands like the president and the Q team are not doing things fast enough or aren't doing them right. And the only thing I would say here is that and I was one of the people that talked about arrests coming up on Christmas as being indicated by what was there in the Q stuff. But if we had discovery, exposure of the potential for some type of mass murder of world leaders that came to light in the time period from, say, Thanksgiving to Christmas, or even a little bit before that, the president and the Q team were flexible enough to deal with those situations and push their schedule or something. If that was actually pushed, they maybe planned on trolling these people to expose them all along. I give them credit for having pretty good strategists in doing this. But whatever transpired, if, for example, we're looking at in those videos that you're showing a WMD, the potential of a WMD that was going to be released in a major metropolitan area, or maybe multiple events, I'd say they were pretty smart to focus on tracking that material down and getting it before it could be used and getting the various players involved. And I'd say we dodged a bullet. Thank God we got President Trump there in office. And I mean the God in heaven. So then let me just add one other thing. So we have, and also before I do that, let me also add what was interesting also is that there was the Wells Fargo Bank prominently showing in these videos, because that was the facility next door and to this Guatemalan Cultural Center. week before, Wells Fargo on the week, I think it was Thursday or Friday, before at the tail end of January, had problems with their computer systems going down and ATMs not working. And then again on the date of the State of the Union, immediately after this event here in on Wilshire, they had additional computer problems. Now this is just a branch, office headquarters. It's not like a prime location that we're aware of, but there's the potential. There's more to that location and event than we understand at this point in time. There's a lot of things in play here. So let's just keep that in mind that there may be a Wells Fargo connection angle to what's going on here. We don't have any proof of that, but there's interesting things that just happen to have happened, coincidence at the same time in the broader Wells Fargo system. So the president does the State of the Union, and then because the government's restarted, he comes down to El Paso the other day, and he does a presentation there. And of course, obviously concerned about the border wall, etc. He, in the course of that presentation, does something that I think is very unusual. He talks about before we had the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, when the only taxing authority that the US government had was for tariffs and collecting tariff money. And in fact, the amount of money that was being collected on these tariffs for goods coming into the US was so great, it was 140% of what our budget was. And so they were arguing over how to spend the excess, what to do with the excess, because it was so profitable. And granted, we had debt and things like that, but there was these discussions. And so he references, this was something that was going on over a period of years, but he references specifically the year 1888. And he doesn't do it once, he does it multiple times. And he goes out of his way to make sure 1888, 1888, 1888. And during this speech, he clearly, without any question, makes the air sign of the letter Q. Anybody that still questions that President Trump is in fact a part of the Q team, part of the whole Q activity, really isn't paying very close attention. If you don't think that President Trump is involved in the Q thing, then you really don't understand it, because they could shut this whole thing down in an instant and haven't. And the assertions of the people involved and the technical expertise that's being applied here is so over the top. It's beyond any reasonable discussion as to whether or not President Trump is part of and is the orchestrator of the Q project. So with that in mind, he doesn't say 1888 and make the Q sign for no reason and go out of his way to pick that year of 1888.
Yeah.
So then we go to the Q drops.
And we gotta wrap it up in about 5 minutes. Go for it, buddy.
We're there. Yeah. Q drop 1888. Everybody should go look at it and read it for themselves. Q drop talks about really one primary thing, and that is arrests. Arrests for all these illegal activities. Arrests now. Says it multiple times. Go look at it and think about it in the context of all the events happening, and you're wondering, when are these arrests going to happen? The president is telegraphing and telling you we're there. With Barr now today being confirmed and going to be sworn in as the new AG. Remember, I mentioned to you previously that Whitaker. What was Whitaker's role? What was he known for when he played for the Patriots and back in his college days? It was for the Statue of Liberty double reverse play, where he's part of the fake. That was his job. So they fake the ball to him. Then he fakes it back to the quarterback, who then goes ahead and makes the touchdown pass. And this, it's not a single Statue of Liberty play, it's a double Statue of Liberty play. So here he is, they faked the ball to him. Everybody's all ticked off. You saw the hearings where they were going after Whitaker the other day. And what's going to happen now? He passes the ball back to Barr. Barr goes ahead and throws it for a touchdown. So we're at this moment where the whole game is about to change. The Mueller stuff is being shut down. The president is telling you that arrests are, imminent. They didn't spend $1.5 billion upgrading Gitmo and building it out for nothing. They aren't sending those prison ships. They didn't create the docking areas for those prison barges at Gitmo, which cost a tremendous amount of money, was very involved, for nothing. They are getting ready to do real stuff. There's 78,000 some odd or sealed indictments that are sitting out there. Normal at any given moment for the last 50 years runs 1,000 or less at any given time. You're at 78 plus times the amount that normally there are sealed indictments. Anybody that's, under any illusions fooling themselves as to what's about to happen, go back to, basketball or whatever. The big kids here, we're at the table. We're on the cusp of something important. I think and our intelligence agencies, NSA, it's very important to protect us. And then one other thing that is important within the Q stuff, and I'm wrapping it up, V, but within the Q stuff, the keystone has been raised numerous times. The keystone in an archway is the stone that locks in the arch type structure at the top of the structure.
Yep.
So it's said multiple times that the keystone for the deep state, the black hats, is the CIA and SES. SES, Senior Executive Service, if you look at their emblem, go just do a Wikipedia on Senior Executive Service, their emblem is a keystone. Mm-hmm. And Q team raises keystone over and over. When we got past the 30 days, it allowed us to furlough and not hire back federal employees. That wasn't aimed at the federal employees that you get your paperwork from at the office. It was aimed at these keystone employees who make $189,000 a year plus, minimum, and who are reported to be about 8,000. But when you include contractors and other positions that aren't acknowledged federally, and they're higher than the rest of the civil service workers, but they're just below all the cabinet members. They're a huge component of our federal government, and they're the deep state.
Yep.
And so they're the keystone. And when we got to that 30 days, now President Trump has assigned a number of keystone people himself, but they could pick and choose who they wanted to keep on the payroll. And so that has not been reported concerning that. Now, within the Q stuff, the other side of the keystone is that military intelligence and NSA are the president and the Patriots' keystone. And that's very important because they're telling you that military intelligence, essentially the Q team, and National Security Agency are our protection against something like what we see in this video that was attempted or going to happen right there in LA just a few days ago. Absolutely. So, and may have been planned for multiple occasions. We may have dodged several bullets. This may have been an ongoing threat. And by the way, so what else is alleged to have happened on February 3rd that we haven't seen confirmation of? Multiple persons are reporting that George Soros was picked up in Switzerland by a special forces unit, and that he is in custody in Switzerland pending some type of release to U.S. authorities. And there's been no independent confirmation other than these couple of fringe sources. So I'm not hanging my hat on that yet. There've been multiple reports, numerous times of his death and everything else, and it hasn't turned out to be true. But there's a component there also that if they had identified where some of these threats were coming from, that the the threat of a release or use of these items could have been removed if it was there and there was any association down through the source organizations. And he did have a lot of influence within this whole deep state operation, including into the SES. So I throw all of that out for your listeners. I hope it didn't sound too tedious for you. I think there's really important stuff occurring around us, and I wouldn't be too frustrated. It's not happening fast enough. I think that it is happening faster than most understand. And at some point, people will be saying, no, slow down, slow down, slow down, because it's happening too fast, because it's coming like a freight train.
Exactly. W, thank you so much for being on. It's been a pleasure, man. It's always a plethora, a floodgate of information. And folks, thank you all for listening. Subscribe, like, comment, share. And CJ, take it away.